Well, excellent friends. Looks like folks are rolling in. Hi, my name is Chris McKenna, and I am so excited to have a conversation with experts, but also friends here as we discuss a critical topic, reclaiming the classroom, social and emotional learning in the age of AI. And as I said, this is a series of conversations. If you like what you hear, then please understand that we are in a series where we are covering all kinds of, I think, pieces of information that's relevant today. That's what Human Change is so good at doing. And so you can find more of these types of webinars on the YouTube channel. But today's topic couldn't be more on point. Our objectives today, friends, are to educate viewers like you in educators and parents. I know there's going to be a lot of different roles that are with us here today in how digital technologies and AI in school is significantly changing how children learn and develop, and then also explore ways in which children can continue to develop social and emotional skills in the classroom. And I'm joined by four expert guests that you'll meet in just a moment. Following my introduction, we're going to have a discussion that will last around 30 to 35 minutes. And then afterward, there'll be a time for questions from each of you. You'll note the Zoom Q&A. I'm sure all of you are familiar with how that works. Go ahead and type those in. And Maria, who's with us from Human Change, she'll assist me in delivering those at the end and covering them all. Now, I'm moderating as a representative of Human Change. The Human Change Foundation aims to protect children against a digitalized childhood. We cannot we connect leading thinkers and scientific experts on children's development and technology reform with decision makers across business, politics, and philanthropy to spark collaborations, encourage further research, and galvanize a global cultural shift towards safeguarding children's humanity. Friends, here's the ideal future. There's so many important words here. A world in which children and adolescents can grow up developing to their full emotional, social, and cognitive potential, not undermined by harmful exposure to digital devices, AI chatbots, or educational tools, and hyper digital environments. In this world, the development of strong family and intergenerational bonds is cherished in childhood. We see that all over the world, right? For many generations, inter-family commitments give children a strong sense of purpose and enable them to develop the life skills required for meaningful relationships with peers and eventually with life partners in real life, not behind screens. And now that leads me to introducing four amazing experts that are with us here today. First, my friend, Dr. Phil McRae, educator and executive staff officer of the Alberta Teachers Association. Phil represents over 51,000 of Alberta's finest individuals, those in the classroom across the province. He has 3 decades in education with roles ranging from the classroom to key leadership roles in government and the broader teaching profession. Dr. McRae's distinguished career features appointments contributing to discussions at the UN and as special advisor on artificial intelligence in education to the Secretary General of Education International. Thanks for being with us today, Phil. Next, I have Simran Mulchandani. He is the CEO and co-founder of Rangeet, a mobile learning application featuring a play-based, measurable social, emotional, and ecological knowledge curriculum that breaks down into SEEK, designed around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. SEEK supports existing curricula and is designed for schools, families, and communities to promote the overall well-being of children and the development of lifelong learners and tomorrow's global stewards. Thank you so much for joining us in the evening for you, but thank you, Simran, for being with us. Next, we have Venetis. She is the Senior Research Analyst with the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution, where she supports the AI in education and family, school, and community engagement initiatives. She previously supported USAID Center for Education and Data Research and Training on topics such as education, program analysis, disability inclusion education, and distance learning. Emma holds a master's degree in communication. Thank you so much for being with us, Emma. And then finally, my friend Clare Morell. She's a fellow at the Ethics and Policy Public Center in the Bioethics, Technology, and Human Flourishing program. Before joining EPPC, Ms. Morell worked in both the White House Counsel's Office and the Department of Justice, as well as in the private and nonprofit sectors. She is also the author of The Tech Exit, a practical guide to freeing kids and teens from smartphones. Thank you so much for being with us today, Claire. And my name is Chris McKenna. I'm the founder of Protect Young Eyes and president of Better Tech, a nonprofit helping young people reclaim 10 billion minutes of screen time from our digital captors. And I'm so thrilled to be with us here to have this critical conversation. I want to start off, friends, by laying a foundation. Our topic title here, Reclaiming the Classroom, Social and Emotional Learning in the Age of AI. There may be some listening in that are saying, well, I've heard of SEL. I've maybe even seen it on things that have been brought home from school. I think I know what social emotional learning is, but I'd like to hear from each of you. What is social emotional learning? Just so we can lay a foundation. And Emma, I'm actually going to go to you first, and then I'll have Phil follow after you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Chris. So there are several definitions of social emotional learning. I might call on the Castle definition. They have a great framework on this. And they really talk about SEL as a process through which kids and adults learn and apply knowledge, skills, and attitudes to help develop the skills that we need to interact with one another and to succeed in educational settings, at work, and in our communities. So things like developing healthy identities, managing emotions, achieving personal goals, demonstrating empathy, making responsible decisions. For education in particular, we know from decades of research that children's ability to learn is shaped by this interconnected growth of their cognitive, their social, and their emotional capacities. They all work together. So, language and executive function skills support social interaction. Emotional regulation influences our attention and persistence in the classroom. Learning can't be separated from children's social and emotional development.
So a strong sense of connectedness there. Phil, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the foundation of what it means to be human. We're social beings.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about social emotional um, learning in schools, learning is always highly relational. It's built on the relationship between students, between teachers and students, parents, the community, the wider world. So when, I think of social emotional learning, I actually think of what it means to be human.
In other words, there's no separating them. I think we see it as something that has to be done almost like a separate subject within the learning environment. And from spending time with you, they are so interconnected and entwined. They must coexist. They must be constantly happening together in order to look at the child from that holistic point of view. I know you believe very strongly in that.
Yeah, well, and education philosophers for 100 years have said education is not actually preparation for life, it's life itself. Every day you go to school, every time
Mm,
you're interacting, you are becoming your, we hope, optimal human potential.
absolutely. Simran, what would you like to add to the conversation?
So, Chris, may I answer your question through three stories?
We love
And
stories, please.
so these are stories that we've observed in classrooms that are implementing our program. So in North India, there was a young boy of 10 who was outraged that his 15-year-old female neighbor was being married off. Then there was a girl in Mumbai who was being bullied and teased in class for having thick glasses and dark skin. And in the desert state of Rajasthan, there were children who were really frustrated by their elders who they felt were wasting water. And we were blown away by the SEL skills that they had developed. The 10-year-old boy approached his approached his teacher and got a group together to oppose and stop the marriage of this underage girl. The girl's classmates stopped bullying her and, in fact, became her protectors. And the children in Rajasthan petitioned the village elders and managed to get them to build a tube well. So that's SEL in practice. And I think that, as the other experts have said, should always be the foundation of education. But in today's age, in the face of the dehumanization and isolating effects of AI, it's never been more important. And as Dr. Phil said, this is what makes us human.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine the lives changed by the bravery and the courage of those three stories, those young people, the other dominoes that will fall in other lives as a result of them stepping up. And that wouldn't have happened without that sort of investment in their lives to
Intervention.
develop those skills.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially, I'm thinking of that bullying situation, right? I mean, that young girl's life radically changed because a couple of students stood up to do something.
And the 15-year-old girl who escaped.
Right. Escaped. Unbelievable. That's
Escaped.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. Claire, anything else on that? I know we're just sort of laying a foundation. We've got a lot of good words and stories there, but just anything from your perspective.
I will be brief because I feel like Phil took the words out of my mouth, that this is social emotional learning these are human skills. Like, we are relational beings, and these are critical relational skills. As humans, we are dependent on others. We have to learn how to interact with, have conversations, work through conflict, and work as a team with other people. And so these skills are just a critical part of learning. And I think, it is what it means to be human. The only other thing I would add to that as well on the emotional piece is there have been these longitudinal studies done of what are kind of key factors for success and happiness as adults. And the number one predictor of adult happiness is childhood self-control, that there is a critical piece of us that we have to learn, that for the good of others and for the good of our long-term flourishing, we have to learn to regulate our emotions and to exercise self-control and perseverance in different situations. So we don't always act on our impulses, because that's not always the right thing to do. And that's not always best for the common good, the good of others, and even the good of ourselves and our long-term flourishing. And so I think that's another critical piece of this, the social piece, but also that emotional piece of helping children learn to identify and understand their emotions and regulate them in healthy ways, and learn to develop that muscle of self-control. So that's
I think that's amazing that you touched on that, Claire, that idea of self-control in a world where stimuli are everywhere, right? It's more important than ever for all of us as humans, but especially to train that muscle up in our young people to develop that self-control so they can avoid that. Well, thank you so much for getting us started. Phil, I'd like to now come back to you as a man who spends so much time in the classroom and with thousands of individuals who are spending thousands of hours in the classroom. How are you observing digital technologies being used in the classroom today? Maybe just sort of give us a lay of the land for those who haven't maybe been in a classroom recently.
Sure. So I am in a small place in the world, about 4 million people in northern in Alberta, Canada. And so my colleagues are very advanced with technology. We have high-speed internet to every hospital, school, and government office in the province. So that goes all the way from the Rocky Mountains to the largest cities. So we have a very wired world in Alberta. I wouldn't say that's necessarily all over the world. So when I think of this conversation, I'm sure many people joining us, there are digital divides where there's a whole range of access to different technologies. What I can say about the context of schools in a post-pandemic world, because I do think, Chris, that we're still being impacted by the pandemic. The context of schools of which digital technologies play out is that we were seeing acute mental health crises in schools pre-pandemic, or chronic mental health challenges, and now we're seeing very acute post-pandemic. And that comes in the form of behaviors. So Claire talked about, what it means to be a flourishing adult, and I really appreciate that idea of regulation. Regulation seems harder now in schools, actually, for not just young people, but also some of their parents. So I mean, there's a whole range of challenges in that. Behaviors are bigger in schools right now, and things feel heavier. So the context in a post-pandemic world is actually quite a stressed ecosystem, I would suggest. What we see with technologies, historically, ed tech, Chris, has been kind of standardized and given to teachers. You will use X platform, and this platform, has very little personalization. And teachers are about being creative and using tools in ways that are really pedagogically or educationally powerful. So they will find a way. What I would say in terms of AI, 8 in 10 teachers in Alberta right now in our province in Canada have used artificial intelligence personally or professionally in the last 6 months. So I would say it's saturated into the environment. They use it for writing, they use it for editing, and they use it for customizing teaching and learning resources. So those are the top 3 things that they're using AI in particular for. But I would just, as a closing kind of a statement on this, ed tech has a huge range, right? I mean, there's good, there's the bad, and then there's the ugly. So, I would say that people are really engaging in ways, or they're trying to find ways that are meaningful and powerful, but most importantly, empowering for students.
I think you're right. As I talk to teachers, they're even wondering how to classify some of these uses of technology. It's not as cut and dried as there's a computer. Well, that's obviously technology. Does the smartboard count as technology? These are the kinds of questions, right? As you said, there's a whole range. Simran, I'm curious as to what you're seeing in your part of the world, to expand on Phil's observations related to what he's seeing in the classroom. This 8 out of 10 in describing how some of these educators are using AI, how does that translate into what you see?
So we were going to talk about, you wanted to hear about some like best practices we've been seeing in
Sure.
So
Yeah, related to that, sure.
really, yeah. So essentially, with regard to developing SEL skills, right? We really believe that a lot of the programs we see out there are like one-off workshops, and that's really not enough to drive change. And just like you need to do like the regular subjects like math, science, and language with regular cadence, SEL is important enough that you need to teach it as a proper curriculum. We need to think about learning science when adopting technologies and curricula. And the research out there is very clear that children learn best when they're engaged in the classroom. And so we need to use an engaging form of play-based methods. And that's actually something we've adopted deeply in our curriculum. Human-centric design is very important. You need to really learn about what your communities need. You need to measure the impact so you're not drinking your own Kool-Aid. And I'd say the most important is families. So families come first. That's where all the growth begins. And so actually incorporating and involving families and communities into the learning is crucially important. And so including homeworks, workshops, outreach programs. So AI is really, one can use AI, and we'll get deeper into that in the conversation. But however you use technology, there has to be a very human aspect to it, which must be incorporated in the classroom.
Simran, you used a phrase learning science, that learning science must be a part of the adoption of these tools. Do you mind just expanding on that briefly?
So I'll give you. So in our case, we came across a research a senior fellow at Brookings, actually, maybe one of Emma's colleagues, Kathy Hirsch-Pasek, who wrote a paper in 2020 about what children need to learn and how they learn best. And so we adopted that program of that philosophy that children learn best through play, and so an entire curriculum has been built around that, so that children are involved in their own learning. You're not actually working with a didactic system, but it's much more experiential, much more involved, so that children are really involved in their own learning. And then you're involving communities, families, because if you want sustained impact, you need to impact and involve parents and families in this. Just think about across the global South, you have a young kid going home and talking about these newfangled ideas of gender, for example. If you don't involve the parents in that learning, it's very likely that the kid will be shut down at home. So you really need that family involvement, because we can do what we can at school, but family is where all the growth starts and is supported.
That's amazing. What I find intriguing about your comment, Simran, is how global this is, that children are children. You said some things that reminded me, and Emma Rebecca will appreciate this, even from her book that she wrote. Rebecca Winthrop from Brookings Institute wrote The Disengaged Teen. And you said something really intriguing there about engaged students learn best. And I think that was supported in the research that Rebecca had in her book even. I think Explorer, right, if I have it right, Emma, that type of child engaged in that way is going to soak up whatever is being taught to them. And I find that fascinating that whether we're in America or Europe or Asia, we find that to be true with our young learners. Claire, I guess I'd like to pivot to you for just a minute. What has been, because I know you've spent a lot of time in research for your book that you've written and so forth, what are some of the effects of increased use of technology in the classroom? We've talked a little bit about the foundation. What are some of the things that have worked? Why do we need to be doing things in the first place? What are we responding to?
Yes. Thank you for asking. So I spent a lot of time, I have a whole chapter about schools in my book, The Tech Exit, because I think we've seen just over the last even 15 years, a really big push for these one-to-one educational screens in the classroom. So a screen on every child's desk and then going home with them, and that's where all their assignments are. It's all very screen-based. And unfortunately, with the rise of these ed tech screens, we've actually seen a decline of learning outcomes in the United States. And COVID certainly contributed significantly to these declines, the lowest scores seen since the 1970s for reading and math and science were seen in 2022, but they were already declining starting in 2012, shortly after the kind of push in the late kind of 2010, 2009, 2008 for these ed tech screens. And there's now increasing neuroscience that kind of explains why we've seen this decline in learning outcomes, which is that children actually comprehend text more deeply when they read it on paper than on a screen. They exhibit stronger reading circuits in their brain when they're reading books and paper and not on the screen. And then even a very recent study out of Columbia University, their teachers college, found that children actually derive deeper meaning from text and engage with it in a more meaningful way when they are engaging with a paper book as opposed to reading the text on the screen. And so there's a concern that children are actually not developing full literacy because the screens encourage the brain to skim versus reading and comprehending the text deeply. And so we've already seen this kind of dangerous trajectory. And now with the kind of push for integrating these AI chatbots and these AI tutors onto those screens, I think the risks are even greater because now it's not just that the kids are losing the cognitive benefits of reading on a screen instead of on paper, but now the AI is saying, I can do the reading for you. I can provide a summary. I can actually write the essay for you based on a prompt where you don't actually have to engage in that critical thinking process that's a part of writing. And early studies, which I hope Emma and others will touch on, early studies out of MIT called Your Brain on ChatGPT showed that kids who were using ChatGPT for essay writing really underperformed on all these cognitive metrics, that the brain becomes lazy, that when other things are doing it for us, when we're outsourcing the learning process, it really undermines our brain's ability to develop these critical skills. And so I would just say, like, we have to kind of view this technological questions around AI a little bit more holistically, because the threats are not just from the kind of AI integration of these AI tools alone, but they kind of started back with these one-to-one educational screens. So I'm not anti-computers in school. I think there's settings like a computer lab, or some schools are opting to do a computer cart where screens are brought into the classroom for some specific purpose where they're really using that computer as a tool to learn a very specific thing, but that the screen is not it should not be the main medium for learning. It should not be the main means of general instruction. As we've all been saying about engaging kids in that, it's a relational process that we learn best through these relationships with other students, with our teachers. And so we are seeing these trends accelerate with AI, but it has started long before that. And so as we kind of ask these questions, we need to look more broadly at the educational screens themselves too.
Chris, can I just add one thing to that?
Please, Phil.
Do you mind? So one of the things that Claire said, I think, is really important. We're hearing this from teachers and families generally. When you look at a screen, you usually blink about 20 times a minute. When you look at paper, you usually blink about, like reading a book, you blink about 20 times a minute. When you're looking at a screen, because of all the color and all the movement, you perseverate on the image, and you actually blink like much less than if you would in a paper-based format, which creates eye strain. There's lots of issues that we're seeing develop with myopia in younger people because of screens. What I would say is a very large cautionary tale is moving everything into a digital or a screen-based environment is not necessarily giving deeper reading ability or understanding. And we need to think of some of the physiological implications of trying to standardize testing and reading and putting everything onto screens. And I think about 20 years ago, I was when I was an advisor to the Minister of Education in Alberta, I was part of an e-textbook project. And we had lots of concerns around that, putting young people into a space where all they did was read online. So I just wanted to reinforce that there's quite a bit of research around the physiology of reading in print-based versus online. And, we need to be mindful.
That's fascinating. I'm now going to be thinking about how often I blink as I stare at my screen all day here at work. So I appreciate that, Phil. Yes, do that very intentionally. Claire, you also used a couple of words that I want to make sure are captured again here in the recording for people to maybe even look into later. Deep learning. That is a very critical two-word phrase here that there's a lot that has been written about and has been explored. This deep learning as opposed to this kind of skimming around all over and constantly being distracted. You also referred to a study that I think others here, if you were to look it up later, would be fascinated to read more about, this idea about acquisition in physical forms and touching and reading physical books versus on a tablet. And to connect to something that Simran said in the importance of the family in that same study, where reading was acquired the best was even then side by side with another caring adult that's helping them interpret and to look at that reading together, doing that shoulder to shoulder reading. So it kind of all connects together, right? The physical, the human, the family interaction. I just find that to be fascinating to me. Now, I want to, Emma, pull you into the conversation because I know the Brookings Institute has done a lot of research on the ways that AI and technology can be used better and for more positive outcomes in the classroom. Do you mind explaining a little bit of that research and sharing with us what you have found?
Yeah. So let me give you some background on where our research is coming from to sort of start. So at the Brookings Institution, our team, through our Global Task Force on AI and Education, has spent the last year conducting consultations and focus groups and interviews with education leaders, technologists, AI experts, teachers, families, students, across 50 different countries. And we've really been diving into the latest research on AI in education, which is updating daily. And we've examined the potential risks that generative AI can have on education and children's learning experience, how we can prevent those risks or begin to, and how we can maximize the potential benefits. And our report's coming out in January. Our findings are still being massaged a bit, so I can preview a little bit of what we're talking about today. And I'll note that a lot of the effects that we find are really determined by how AI tools are used and why. There's a lot of variance in terms of what AI is and what it looks like in terms of how children engage with it. So on sort of the benefit side, we do see several ways that AI can be beneficial to education. So for example, we've talked to teachers who express how they can leverage AI for personalized learning programs. Many teachers really want to tailor their instruction to their teacher's strength or their students' strengths, their needs, their interests. And that's not something you need technology to do, but personalization can be quite burdensome on your time and logistics. And so we've seen teachers really benefit from tools that help them to strategically adapt their materials, their instruction, their assessments in a way that allows them to continue to provide immediate and responsive feedback to their students. Another benefit we've seen is for neurodivergent students. So for example, adolescents with autism spectrum disorder can use AI chatbots to simulate real-world communication scenarios, giving them a safe space to rehearse those interactions in a judgment-free zone before they then practice in the real world. There are also tools that help annotate text in a way that helps enhance the reading abilities for students with dyslexia, for example. So there are some great benefits, but importantly, these are primarily seen with types of AI that are carefully built for educational purposes, that are trained on vetted content, that have data protection policies in place. They're used in a controlled environment, and they're designed to support their learning rather than allow kids to, as Claire was speaking to, offload those critical thinking processes. There are other types of AI that are far more common. These types of AI that are available to the general public, that are trained on unvetted content from across the web, that don't prioritize learning, or that are incentivized to keep us engaged for a long amount of time and attached to coming back to them. In most surveys we see of teens' AI use, more than half of them, sometimes up to 95%, are reporting using this type of AI. And that type of AI is responsible for most of the risks we see, including that to social emotional development. And I can speak more on those risks to social emotional development if you'd like, but I'll let you guide us.
No, that's a great pause, and I think you're pointing toward this right. You bring in all the good with the not so good, and we, as the leaders, as the teachers, as the parents, need to help pull those apart and direct in the right direction. And Simran, in developing the tools that you have through your Seek model, I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about design and what principles should be a part of the design of these tools, as Emma was referring to there. And I'd love for you to take that a little deeper for us in just a minute. I can see your brain already moving on this. So
I'm going to talk about how you can use these tools or digital tools so that they serve children, their emotional and social development. A lot of people we talk to believe that children shouldn't even have devices till they're 16, and that's connected to their sort of the brain development, their limbic and prefrontal cortex. And in a world where children do have devices, so what we tried to develop was a series of lesson plans. We can't control how AI will evolve, but we can educate or form or create teaching materials so teachers can show children how to live with AI and digital media. So some of the principles that we have followed are that, and this is just specifically to serve social and emotional development. We focus a lot on online safety. Many people hide behind their screens and spread hate. So how do we teach children to promote kindness online? Helping children to spot real versus fake. Social comparison is such a big deal, right? How social comparison is rife. So how do you help children to avoid this and spot that? Safeguarding your intellectual property and others. So many people are stealing IP online. Children should be armed with knowledge to see through anthropomorphic AI. I think that's one of the largest risks that an adolescent faces. We must reinforce to children that they can use online tools, but we focus on we try to get them to focus on their own intelligence. We'd like to talk about HI, human intelligence, powered or helped by AI, and not the other way around. So HI helped with AI. And then finally, balancing screen time and real life time. So these are the kind of to really help teachers, because we can't control the way AI is developing. Let's assume we can't. So what can we do to develop and help teachers and families to create social bonds, connectedness? These are the general strategies that we've deployed.
absolutely. And I love that you keep bringing the family back into this, because as I talk to educators, right, there's this 7 and 17. There's the 7 at school, but the 17 in a 24-hour day at home. And if we're going to direct our children to discern the difference between some of these technologies that Emma was just expanding on, there's a critical role that caregivers have in extending that conversation to that 17 hours. I know there's sleep, but you get the principle, right? That is so critical there. So thank you. Thank
Chris,
you
if
for
I could
that.
just add, that's actually what we really actively do. So we enable teachers, but the caregivers, the parents, families become an integral part of the entire teaching and learning process. Without that, it's just not complete.
And Phil, I'd like you to build on that, because I know you have thoughts, because you spend just so much time in educational settings. I want to build on how these technologies can support human flourishing, can support human development, because I know you've put a lot of thought into that too.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Just before I go into that, I think it's really important to reinforce what Simran said about AI is not an entity. We don't want to anthropomorphize it and give it a sense of personhood.
Yes.
Because these are neural nets, these are systems, these are large language models, they're bits and bytes, they are not conscious beings. And with companion artificial intelligence that's emerging, yesterday I just was sent a AI that will take 3-minute recordings of people when they're alive, and then the idea is that you can talk to your loved ones after. Like, for me, kind of horrific structuring now around how these systems are creating, to what Emma said about personalization or personification. And they're not, they're just systems. So I think it's really important to lay that as a groundwork. In terms of how technology or ed tech can be used, the way I look at it, and from all of our research and experience, if the technology extends, enhances, or deepens that relational bond, or those highly relational spaces of learning where social emotional learning is actually being developed, then there's real strength in it. So for example, in a world that's more fragmented, that's more polarized, where there's an us and them, if technology can be used like it is today to bridge people from 3 different continents on an issue and have them think through something, that extends thinking. It extends consciousness and debate and dialogue. And that's a really empowering and powerful use of technology. So I look at ed tech as if it's extending, enhancing, then that's really supportive. If, however, the technology is getting in the way of, if it is limiting, if that technology is narrowing what young people are learning, then that's a larger problem. And we do see that with technology being distracting, right? Distracting in a classroom with the constant pinging. If you see the technology getting in the way because it's building more aggression in schools and school communities, or whatever it is, for me, it is very much that double-edged sword. But I do think that with AI, we're in some undiscovered country, Chris. This is very different in terms of the way that it can, get to know the person, the system can, and then use language, hack human language to make you feel some connection. So I just, and it was interesting when Emma was talking about personalization. Forever, I have seen the commodification of children being sold as, well, the teacher can't personalize learning because there's 42 kids in the class, but our AI tutor can get to know your child better than the teacher can. And give me a break. If we want to talk about personalization, put the person back in personalization.
I think you're probably getting a whole lot of cheers that we can't hear from participants, Phil, who are a part of this. That's right. No, that's so important. And Emma, I'd like to come back to you, because that's what needs to happen to get this right. What are the possible outcomes when we get it wrong? Because I think we're in this, as Phil said, we're in this unknown territory right now. A lot of people are saying, oh, it's just like social media. It's kind of, we learned our lessons. We're going to get this right. This is a bit of a different beast. So what can go wrong with our young people when we don't do some of the things that Phil is talking about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think we can learn a lot from the way we handled social media, but we do have to understand that this is a different beast. AI has a lot more risk than other types of technology because of what a lot of people have talked about here. It's designed to sound and feel like a human being. While most of us, including our kids, know that they're machines, it doesn't always feel that way. The models are designed to respond word by word. So it looks like they're actually thinking and typing out a response. They use personal pronouns like I and me. They mimic empathy. They're sycophantic, which means that they give us positive feedback. They reinforce what we believe, our ideas, our self-perceptions. And all of those design choices encourage us to anthropomorphize AI, or essentially to assign human traits to us, which activates our own empathy and can lead us, especially children, to develop emotional attachments to these systems. And that's dangerous, especially for kids who are already struggling with their mental health. A lot of kids might turn to AI friends to discuss emotional struggles rather than turning to trusted adults. It can also risk social development. There was a common sense media study that found that 72% of U.S. teens are using AI companions, and it makes sense why these friends might be appealing. They're constantly available. They're attuned to our emotional needs completely because they don't have feelings of their own that they have to manage. They're always patient. They're always agreeable. They're always complimentary. It's a frictionless relationship. And that feels great, but that's not what real human relationships are like. Real friends are busy sometimes. They have their own messy emotions. They give you tough and honest feedback. And so when kids engage in this artificial intimacy with their AI friends, they can lose or fail to develop the social skills that are essential for human relationships: reciprocity, empathy, understanding nonverbal cues, tolerance for difficult conversations. Um, and it can be easy to prefer that method of friendship. If AI friends are so easy to talk to, why bother with messy human relationships? But we see in the research that those with higher dependence on AI companions have worse real life interpersonal skills. They experience higher levels of loneliness, and that really impacts the educational experience. As we discussed in the beginning, learning is inherently social and relational. We're evolved to learn with other people. If kids are used to frictionless relationships, instant responses, feeling like the AI friend is always right, then they're going to get frustrated with group work and debate and interact less with their classmates and reduce their collaboration and community building, lose a sense of their own authentic voice if they're using AI to write for them, become less confident in their own ideas. And so kids' use of AI, including and especially the use outside of the classroom that's not created for educational purposes, can really impact their social and emotional development and be a detriment to the learning experience if we allow it to go on in a kind of uncontrolled way.
That's right. And if we're preparing these amazing young people to become flourishing adults, as Claire said, then giving them practice relationally in environments that are not like what it is to be an adult in real relationships, on real teams and real projects at real work, then we are not setting them up for that success. Now, in looking at the Q&A, we have a number of really great questions that I want to get to in the Q&A. Before we do that, I want to kind of pivot us toward then some of the solutions. I think this is going to come up in the Q&A. Claire, just kind of based on what we've talked about here, we've talked about some ways it can work, some of the ways it can go wrong if we don't. Based on some of the research that you've done in speaking to a number of educators I know around the world and how this can look right, what are some of the attributes of that ideal classroom as we're moving toward some of those more positive outcomes that we're hoping for?
Yes. So I take a pretty strong stance on this and I don't shy away from it in my book. I mean, the title you can see is The Tech Exit. I know it's provocative. It's not about all tech, but about addictive, highly addictive technologies in particular, and the ways that ed tech screens can be addictive and distracting to kids. And so I would just say the best practices that I've seen are schools that are really moving in a low tech or even no tech direction. So there's been a resurgence in these Waldorf schools, classical schools that have adopted some of these practices. I mean, even the Silicon Valley inventors of a lot of these technologies, they send their kids to schools that don't have screens. And so, I mean, these are the designers of the technology. They understand that they want their children to have an education without them. And so I'm encouraged. I mean, just one really like winning policy has been just trying to ban cell phones from the school day. And so, I mean, those are not educational screens. This is just saying the learning environment should not be interrupted by these personal cell phone devices, and not just during class time, but we're talking about all this social emotional learning. So much of this is happening during passing periods, recess, lunch, where they're having conversations and having to interact with each other. Well, if the phones are part of the school day, they can get on these social media apps. Everyone is just immersed in their own individual screen, and there is so much of that human connection and relationship that
That's
is
right.
lost. And so we're just seeing such tremendous results. And this is happening. It's not just the United States, it's the UK, it's
Right.
Australia, Denmark, Sweden, Finland. Like all these countries have moved to these phone ban policies, and they are just having tremendous impacts, not only on the academic outcomes, but the social environment of the school day, the interactions between student and
Right.
teacher. The teachers don't feel like they have to be phone police anymore. They actually really get to engage with their students. And so I really do recommend that is like the best starting place, is just getting rid of the phones from the school day bell to bell, but then building off of that, encouraging schools to move away from so much reliance on the one-to-one educational screens, and instead using technology in a very targeted way. Maybe it's a computer course or a computer lab setting, or again, these kind of computer carts where they bring the computers just for a very specific purpose, but that really most of the learning is happening between student and teacher, or they're using papers and physical books, because as we've just all discussed, the research just shows this is the best way kids learn, when all their senses are engaged, when it's this embodied relational process versus the medium of a screen, which
Right.
really just like flattens that whole process. So those would be my
Thank you.
recommendations.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Claire. And in order to help, and I want to come to you, Simran, before we get to our first question, to help students build some of that muscle strength when it comes to this resilience. That's exactly what your 4 principles in SEEK have done. So I want to give you just a couple of minutes to talk about the curriculum that you've built, and then I'm going to jump into some of our questions.
Okay, I'll just try to go through this really quick. So we have a curriculum. Thanks for asking me about it, Chris. So it's operational in India, Bangladesh, Nigeria. And the idea really is building strong social and family bonds in this age of AI. And we have to act now to protect humanity. So we built this. It's a 4-year curriculum that builds knowledge, voice, and agency. And I think the agency bit is probably the most important piece. And like you mentioned, it's 4 key areas: well-being, digital citizenship. This is something that we've added recently, societal justice, and the climate crisis. And this curriculum sits on our app, and it's delivered by teachers to children aged 6 to 16. And I really want to stress here, it's a teacher's aid. The children don't get children don't get a screen. I completely agree with Claire. You've got to keep the mobiles out of the school. And so that's how it's delivered. We've got 3 learning umbrellas. I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but they develop mental health. It's based on the golden rule of doing unto others as you would want them to do unto you. And we've brought ecology learning as a big piece of what we do, because that's something that stresses children out today. So we're looking at developing well-being and agency around what can I do for the planet. So that's essentially the curriculum.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Simran. I hope individuals will check that out. Friends, I'm going to pivot toward the questions here. We have a number of good ones. And Phil, I'm going to direct the first one in your direction. It says, about a year ago, I sat in a school board meeting for my public school. The tech team excitedly announced that SEL had been transitioned fully to the iPads. Everyone clapped and cheered. In my gut, that felt wrong. Shouldn't humans be involved in social and emotional learning? What is your reaction to that shift?
Yeah, well, I first of all have been in many, many meetings where this similar kind of a thing has transpired. The fact that the IT team was talking about social emotional learning and so on, I think is interesting. So there was some, sounds like techno boost or boosting going on. First of all, I think it's important to be part of the conversation. And when you are part of the conversation, so I always say having the conversation changes the conversation. When you're actually in that dialogue, you can start to articulate, like everybody on this panel is doing so well, different considerations and aspects of what we're going through. So I think you need to be at the table. But I also think that when your intuition, when your gut tells you that it just felt wrong, that is based on a wisdom, personal or professional wisdom that you need to listen to. So when you hear an oversell, like, well, this AI is going to be the best therapist that we've ever seen, and it's going to do cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's going to be excellent. It's like, what? Hold on a second, right? Just pause and reflect when you see that intuition. What I would say is when we look at children and youth and actually adulthood, and we look at healthy brain development and resilience, the ability to bounce back from adversity, which we're facing with extreme weather and climate, as Simran had said, and other things, there's 4 things that we need to be mindful of. Number 1, positive human interactions. That's really important. Not positive AI, artificial, digital companion interactions. That's not what the research shows us. Neurophysiological development is enhanced and strengthened with positive human interaction. Active connection with the physical environment, getting outside and putting your hands in the mud or being in the environment helps you understand resilience because the environment is resilient. You really see lots of benefit of being in that physical environment and being active. Free play. We live in a world now where young people have 7 minutes of free play a day, right? 50% drop in free play in North America since the 1970s. And that's because there's more and more screen time, but also there's more and more structure around young people's lives. When you learn to play and free play, like in Finland, Claire, that many of my friends and colleagues, I've been to Finland many times and brought delegations, free play lets you learn rules. And then finally, I think in a world where we're seeing systems like AI making more and more decisions for us, we need more critical thinking, we need more creativity, and we need to really start thinking about pushing things that AI will not replace in human beings, right? Creativity and fine motor manipulation and social emotional interactions. Those are bottlenecks to AI that will displace lots of different jobs. And if we're going to have these conversations at a school board meeting, bring some of that forward in a really research-informed way.
Great. Thank you, Phil, very much. I'm going to ask one, and I'm not exactly sure who's best to answer it. So I'm going to trust my experts here to raise a hand and help me out. But I'm guessing that this is the sentiment of more than a few people listening. What can I do if I'm worried that my children's school has already adopted too much tech in the classroom? Claire, you were first. Go ahead.
I get this question a lot. So I will just say, I think it actually is so critically important for parents to be raising their voices. I often hear from school administrators that they actually think the parents want the technology in the classroom. So they really don't know what they don't know. And I do think, parents really should have the ultimate authority over their kids' education. The schools are operating en loco parentis, but it's really ultimately the parents. And so the first thing I just really recommend parents ask for is simply an exemption. I mean, they make exceptions for all sorts of medical conditions or reasons about other things. And so we should just start by asking if your child can complete these assignments on paper or, via a book. And so I think just starting by simply just asking if you can have an exemption from some of these things for your own children. I know we talked a little bit about neurodivergent children, but I especially actually hear this from parents whose kids struggle with autism or ADHD. They find that they're actually more dysregulated by these ed tech screens. And so I think it's particularly important, if that's the case for your child, that you really do ask and advocate for them for exemptions if it will help them to complete those assignments by paper instead. So I do just encourage parents, like, you are the constituents of your school. I mean, it's your children, but it's you on their behalf advocating for them. And so we shouldn't be afraid to speak up. And I think some key times can be school budget decisions. I've been encouraged by some recent announcements that the school district decided not to refurbish or replace all of the ed tech screens because of the budgetary expense. And so I think trying to use those inflection points as parents to say, hey, we don't want to replace the screens, we'd like to return to paper textbooks, can be kind of a way to help kind of push that direction.
Yeah, and I think what's important there, Claire, just to add a little bit, is that our conversations with the school need to be as collaborative as possible until they can't. Like, we need to enter these conversations in partnership with the schools who are doing a lot of really hard work right now, and not see it as combative, but collaborative as long as we can, to bring them the information and to work alongside them to come up with solutions. And I think that's so important. I'm going to hit on maybe one or two more here. This one I think is maybe Emma. I'm going to just see how it goes here. It says, so if AI generally only benefits, because it gets to the research, and that's why, if AI only generally benefits a very small percentage of students, neurodivergent and others, if used very carefully, why is it being pushed to all students? Parents generally trust schools to do what's best for our kids, but this seems to be serving only AI companies and their profits. How would you respond to that?
That's a good question, and it's hard to understand all of the motivations and incentives, but I think generally we get excited when there's new technology and all of the things it can do for us, and schools want to be on the precipice of what is going to be useful for their students in their future, and a lot of people are talking about how AI is the future. And so you can understand why there would be a push to better integrate technology that they feel like students are going to be using in the future. I think that could be a motivation. I think there's a lot of other factors in place. And I think that we need to understand, the reality that AI is not going to disappear. And I think for that reason, AI literacy is really important in our schools. And AI literacy does not mean necessarily using technology in the classroom. It doesn't mean spending more time on devices or learning how to integrate AI into everything you do. A lot of the great AI literacy curriculums prioritize tech-free, discussion-based lessons. But knowing that even if schools limit AI, kids are going to use it outside of it. And so it's important to have the pedagogy in the classroom to help students understand AI, know that it's not a human, it doesn't think or feel, it makes mistakes. And so I think there is I think it's right to think that kids need to learn about this technology. I think we need to do some deep thinking about what the extent of
Right.
their access and use of it should be.
That's right. I think what you're pointing towards the difference between AI usage versus AI literacy. And we can be teaching young people about AI long before they're using it, not different than other difficult skills, whether it's driving or others. And I think that's really important, because what I've found in front of students is there are really simple things that really awaken their senses to what's going on here. I was in front of a group and just told them the simple idea of let's use it as a prompt instead of it prompting us all the time, right? Start with our creativity and then going to it to preserve our awesomeness instead of offloading that all of the time. Now, Simran, what I want to do here before we wrap things up, because I want to end on time, because you think so deeply about the design and have built a beautiful tool that thinks about what children need, how they learn, and how to design with them in mind. What are just some real simple questions or tests that educators or parents could be using to be asking about some of the tools that are being used in the classroom, so they can be assessing whether or not it's been designed and created with their young people in mind? Just what are some real simple things that we should be looking for in the tools that are being used?
Yeah, so I think, when I was talking earlier about some of the principles on which we developed our tool, I think it really comes back to and I'm speaking from the perspective of a developer and not a researcher here. It's important that I go back to it's hard to say, anthropomorphic AI. That's one of the biggest considerations we had when developing our module about digital literacy and digital safety. In fact, it's funny. We have a little bot that looks kind of human to teach the children. And we've deliberately designed it that way because I think I was chatting about this, that, there's in China and Japan, they're coming out with materials that feel like skin. And it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference between what's real and what's human, and what's AI. So I think that's the key consideration, is to really keep reminding children through our modules that I have no feelings. I am here to help you. I am here to support your learning, but I am absolutely not a human, and I cannot be looked at as a friend. And I think one of the panelists said, I can talk to a chat GPT for 7 days at a stretch, and it'll never get tired. And that's just a horrible way of developing human relations. So definitely, it's that big disconnect between that big disconnect that we're looking to fill. That it's not I'm not human, and be really conscious of that the entire time.
That's right. And remind kids over and over again that it's metal and sand. I sometimes show a picture of grains of sand in terms of trying to convey silicone, right? It's metal and sand. It's not a flesh and blood person. And even a picture like that, they're like, oh yeah, you're right. So I know it's a hard word to say, but that's exactly the issue. And I think you've hit right on it. So thank you. Friends, we are at time. We could talk for 11 more days, I think, on this, but we are at 11 o'clock my time. So I want to end on time here. And thank you so much. Again, this will be a recording that is available on YouTube. You'll be able to see some of what has been shared here, links to some of the resources that have been shared in the conversations here. But thank you so much for participating, for being a part of this vision of the human change movement. And let's never forget, I'm just going to read a little statement here, that childhood is for wiring up the brain with tons of movement, because brains are built and not born. We need skin knees, paper books, eye and skin contact, holding pencils and crayons. Yes, some technology, but more importantly, something to feel, something to touch, and someone to hold. This is what our young people need in order to become thriving adults. Thank you so much for your time here today. Have a great rest of your day, afternoon, or morning, wherever you're at. Take care.